Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Cochran, the CEO and Executive Director of the United States Conference of Mayors, and I would like to welcome you to this National Political Forum celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. It seems like only yesterday when you look back in the 70s with the mayors of this nation working with Senator Muskie to pass this act. That was the time when I was a young boy and I had black hair. And later we have created the EPA with President Nixon. And so it was a very, very, very significant time for our country and for the environmental health of our country. And this legislation that was passed 40 years ago set this country on a course of environmental responsibility that no other law as it was in our history. The Clean Water Act paved the way to protect our citizens from disease, our environment from destruction, and it fuels our economy. It was a great thing, and it still is. And yet, when you have changes and transformations as significant as this act does, there are challenges. We're here today to celebrate this legislation. We're here today to celebrate this country and this government for recognizing what we need in the environmental nature. One only has to go to East Berlin and places like that and see the ravages of what happens to cities when there is no central government assistance in this matter. So as mayors and as cities, you know, it's all about us to make the changes. And so we're here today to talk about some of the challenges that mayors are facing 40 years after the Clean Water Act. First of all, if you travel outside the United States, they used to say, if you're going to Mexico, make sure it's rum and Coca-Cola. In the United States of America, you can drink out of the tap. Believe me, it's the cleanest water on earth. When you go to Russia, like I was 2 weeks ago, you know, you always ask that question, is it okay if I brush my teeth? Can I take a shower? And when you go to China, they would say, our water is the cleanest. But when you look at the Chinese mayors, they're drinking bottled water. So let's understand something right now. We're very proud of the fact that the United States drinking water is among the safest in the world. And our governments, our city governments, have made huge investments to achieve clean water goals. But the successes in addition to clean water is waterborne diseases, typhoid, cholera. They cause sickness and they cause death, and they have been nearly eradicated. Limiting water and wastewater rates to affordable levels has fueled growth in the American economy, because if your rates go down, you can have money to spend somewhere else. It's that simple. Our lakes and our rivers have improved tremendously since the 1960s. It seems only yesterday when Randy Newman wrote that song about the river that was burning in Cleveland. Today, our rivers are no longer burning. Today, we have commercial fisheries on our rivers, and they are on the rise. And there's still much to be done to protect our water resources. And the rising cost of doing those things bring us to a fiscal crossroads with affordability. It is more important than ever to ensure that our investments produce the greatest public benefits. And that's why we're here today. Many mayors have registered concern over the financial impact the EPA is having by prosecuting cities because of sewer overflows during rain events. Let me give you a figure. Just like in public safety, the cities of America spend billions of dollars for police officers. If you don't have a safe city, as Mayor Wellington Webb of Denver said, you don't have a city. Just as we spend billions of dollars to protect this nation, you know, local governments spend $103 billion. This is no federal money, this is no state money. $103 billion on water and wastewater in 2009. This is up from $50 billion in 1995. So you can see what's happening there. Each year our cities are spending more just to keep up with Washington, who continually to issue new proclamations that add more and more costs on cities with little financial help. Let's consider just one of the mandates. Let's consider one of the costly mandates, and that's combined sewage overflows, CSO. Now, for those persons that don't understand what CSO is, believe me, at the United States Conference of Mayors, we do. Because over the past 4 years, and by the way, let me just say this does not start with the Obama administration. It started many, many years ago with Carol Browner, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration. So this just didn't jump up here when President Obama was elected. But it is still a problem. And so the combined sewer overflow, at the time it was designed, combined sewers were considered a very good technology because it's very basic. It prevents raw sewage from backing up into your house. Combined sewers, like the name suggests, combine sewer and stormwater systems. Together, these waters are sent to a wastewater treatment plant where it is treated and released into a lake and river. However, when there's significant rain, you know what rain is? We have no control over rain. We have no control over traffic. We have no control over rain, but it rains. And so when there's significant rain, it overwhelms the pipes, and there was a safety valve included. It prevented the sewage from backing up into residences. So the issue is we had safety valves, and so instead of releasing these into a water body, we resulted in situations where there were some beach closings and some boil water alerts. For years, the only way to fix the CSO problem was to build new sewer lines under the city or build giant holding facilities or tunnels for the wastewater. The cost of these solutions are staggering, absolutely staggering, and they rely on energy-intensive pumping and costly, quote, gray environmental designs, infrastructure designs. For example, the cost of Washington, D.C. is $2.6 billion. The cost of Indianapolis is $3.1 billion. The cost of Atlanta, Georgia is $4.1 billion. The cost of Omaha, Nebraska is $1.7. The cost to St. Louis is $4.7. Let me remind everybody, in the urban world, there's $3.8 billion a year in a community development block grant. And the CSO for St. Louis, Missouri is $4.7 billion. This is just the cost of one mandate. One mandate. So we've heard about this from our mayors, and we are trying to talk to the EPA, and we are very happy that we are working with the Obama administration. We are working with the EPA administrator and others to come up with something that's been termed in what we're calling an integrated planning policy. Integrating planning policy. There have been 5 workshops throughout America. My staff have been there, mayors have been there. We are trying to put a framework on this baby called the integrated planning policy, which is something that we negotiated and we want. So after arraying all of these factors, they would consider a city's proposal, and the key word here is flexibility. In other words, the Obama administration, EPA, will work with the city to make it as flexible as possible. Unfortunately, we have not seen the integrated planning policy. It was promised 2 months ago, and we're still waiting. So we are looking forward to that. We understand and we believe that the administration is working with some cities for the implementation, but we want to make sure that as we move forward and we work on this new plan, that we do not get more decrees and more mandates and more rules. So I think what we're asking today, in addition to some other issues, is we just put an abeyance on any new rules until we can work together on the integrated planning policy. We are now after 40 years at the point where Congress is looking at this legislation. They are threatening to change legislation. They're calling us to the Hill, wanting us to join with them to change the legislation. And we're concerned about this. This is the political environment that we're in. And so that's why we're working very hard with the Obama administration and the EPA. But here's something for certain, and you need to understand this. We, in the greatest recession since the Great Depression, we cannot afford to pay for a continuing cascade of water mandates. And that's why we're here today. So now let's hear from the mayors. I'd like for each of them to identify themselves and to tell you about their city's experience. Let me say that there are many, many mayors, including my president, Mayor Antonio Villalobos of Los Angeles, including my vice president, Mayor Michael Nutter, including the chair of our water council, Rollins Blake of Baltimore. There are many, many cities who are working with EPA. Many, many cities. There are a select number of cities. We want all cities to be working with EPA. We want all cities to be recognized so that we can work together to make this a situation that will work in today's economy and at the same time protect the environment of this nation. So at this point, I would like to call on each mayor to talk about his or her situation. I would like first to call on Mayor Ron Littlefield of Chattanooga. Mayor Littlefield.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cochran. I'm Ron Littlefield. I'm the mayor of the city of Chattanooga, which is a mid-sized city, presently with a population of around 170,000 in the city and about 500,000 in the immediate metropolitan area. It actually extends across the line into Georgia. So we're a river city, and we have an industrial history and heritage, which is fairly unique in the South. You don't find a lot of industrial-based cities, but if you look back at old pictures of Chattanooga from the Civil War and immediately thereafter, or pen and ink drawings or whatever, one feature always stood out, and that was smokestacks. And they were so proud of it at the time that if they weren't billowing smoke, they actually drew it in so that people would know this is a heavily industrialized city. What you couldn't see, in addition to the smokestacks, were the sewers. We had combined sewers. We still have combined sewers, principally in the older part of the city, in the downtown area. Some of them are brick. We have worked on them over the years. They're lined. We keep them in as good a shape as we can, but just as Mr. Cochran said, replacing that particular part of our infrastructure is really not financially or even physically feasible, just because of the way the city was built. In 1969, Walter Cronkite, who is very prominent on the wall right outside this door, told the world that the dirtiest city in America was Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was not a Chamber of Commerce moment for us. He was talking particularly about air pollution, which was pretty easy to see if you visited there. But what you couldn't see, or you didn't normally see, was below Chattanooga on the Tennessee River were little signs along the river that said avoid human contact, because industrial pollution is not just air pollution, it's water pollution as well. Well, we started on these problems before there was an Environmental Protection Agency. We were a city that knew that we had to deal with this, that people, the quality of life was important to the whole population. And so we made headway, and we still benefit from the fact that we were there on this issue before EPA showed up on the scene. We work with EPA, we respect EPA, we know our EPA and our state environmental people very well on a first-name basis, and we will continue to do that. With that, let me say that we are this close to a new consent order, which we've worked on for about 2 years. So I'm not here to criticize those that have worked on that process. We're now a city that is clean and green. We're featured almost every week in some superlative list, which we're very proud of. If you came to Chattanooga today, you would not recognize it as a city that had that kind of a dirty history, but we are. We're all in favor of environmental quality. I think that should actually go without saying. We are cities that represent people, children, And for that reason, we cannot shirk or ignore that responsibility. But since the 1970s, cities have been shouldering most of this responsibility. So the question that we have yet to deal with is, how do we finish the job? And that's really what we're looking at, finishing the job. And then the big problem, how do we pay for it?
Mayor Littlefield, can you just make a brief comment on your recall situation and how it relates to some of these mandates?
Well, I was, along with Mayor Berger, was on one of these panels a few months ago, having to do with...
This is a very political issue that the mayors have to live with when these mandates are passed down from Washington.
Well, people tend to not be happy, and in this Tea Party-fueled environment that we have today, when you raise rates even for necessities like water quality, and that's really what we have done in Chattanooga. We raised rates, we raised taxes, and we, most inflammatory, raised stormwater fees, which people love to refer to as rain taxes. But you have to clean the water, and there's a cost associated with it, and for that I was rewarded with a recall movement fueled primarily by the Tea Party, which is still ongoing, I might add. I have about 10 months left in office, but they're still trying to recall me. But you cannot expect this to be a process that's without political bumps. And the fact that cities and city mayors have to step up and do it is something that we would like to see recognized on the national level.
Let me ask you this, Mayor. What does the sort of the physical geography, how does that play such a unique role for the city of Chattanooga when you're looking at your CSO plan?
Chattanooga is a river city. The Tennessee River actually bisects our downtown area. The Tennessee River is about the 5th largest river, most significant river in the United States. It is the heart of the Tennessee Valley Authority, of all of that fame. And we are at the bottom of the bowl. We're a city of about 150 square miles, which is fairly large geographically. We're actually just a little bit larger than Atlanta, if you look at the geography. But the area that is drained is much larger than that. And so everything that bubbles out of the ground or gets contaminated out there in the drainage area flows into Chattanooga. We have the responsibility of, before it actually leaves Chattanooga, of making sure that it's clean. And so one of my big problems with the way that we have been going about this process of cleaning up the water is the fact that by hammering away on cities, and Chattanooga's not unique, there are a lot of river cities. I mean, that was normally the place you would put a city. If there was a river around, you put it at the low point because it was easy to drain everything there. It was the heart of commerce usually. But by hammering away on cities and ignoring those that are out in the outlying areas, EPA is doing something that I don't think they intend to do, but it is a byproduct. It is an effect, and that is they're encouraging sprawl. I've been very offended and upset many, many times in the years that I've been in government when public officials outside of Chattanooga basically sold themselves of, you can move out here. You can move beyond that invisible line, which is the city limit, and therefore you won't have to pay those stormwater fees. Your cost of doing business is lower. The effect of that is we don't have a densifying, efficient city as we could have, because EPA and the way that they are imposing the regulations are actually promoting sprawl.
Thank you. Next we have Mayor Dave Berger for Lima, Ohio.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for properly pronouncing our name. It's good to be here today. Lima is a community in Northwest Ohio. We're a proud community, but we're a community of modest financial means. We're a city that has shrunk from roughly 52,000 to 38,000 over the last 3 decades as more affluent households move to the suburbs. In the last 10 years, in order to balance our budget, we have shrunk our workforce from 530 to 350. I no longer have a chief of staff. I haven't had a secretary for 13 years. We know how to manage in order to balance our budget. We do without. Our annual household median income is roughly $30,500. Ohio's, by comparison, is $47,000, and the national median household income is $52,000. 30,000 versus 52 on a national basis. Nearly 1/3 of my community is living under the poverty threshold of $22,000. Additionally, our demographic profile includes aging baby boomers that comprise a substantial and growing class of fixed income seniors. Our low, moderate, and fixed income households are particularly vulnerable to the increasing costs of basic services like water, sewer, and stormwater fees. Having said that, however, since the passage of the Clean Water Act, the City of Lima has spent nearly $60 million on capital improvements for our sewer system, with $25 million of that coming initially from the federal government as a grant, something that does not exist in this current day of federal mandates. As a result of our expenditures, we have substantially improved the water quality in the Ottawa River, which cuts through the middle of our city. An improvement in which now 65% of the river is in full attainment for warm water habitat status, and 35% is in partial attainment. Before the Clean Water Act, 60% of the river was in non-attainment. 60% in non-attainment versus 65% in full attainment today. Now, no portion of the river is in non-attainment. We're proud of what we have accomplished. But we are very concerned about what is now and what has been demanded of us over the last decade by US EPA. And I'd like to give you a history of our what's called the long-term control plan. The city submitted our plan in 1998 to the state, which has primacy in this matter. Ohio EPA reviewed that and 1 year later approved the plan, to which we were committed in spending another $60 million. 4 years later, in 2005, US EPA, 4 years after approval, interceded and rejected the long-term control plan. Since then, Lima has spent another $6 million on attorneys and engineers, and we haven't cleaned another damn drop of water. US EPA is attempting to force us into a consent decree that would entail $104 million in capital costs, which for our households in poverty would represent a sewer bill that would range between 4 to 7% of their household income. Think about spending 7% of your household income on a sewer bill. No one can argue that this is not unreasonable. No one can argue that this is not a matter of economic injustice. I have made it clear that I will not take forward any plan that my community cannot afford. Furthermore, I have also made it clear that I will not take and accept any financial penalties as a part of any settlement with the federal government. They may treat us like criminals, but I will not accept that status. Last year, Mayor Suttle and I co-authored a resolution for consideration by the membership of the Conference of Mayors. It's called Resolution 43. We ask Congress for one of two things. Either give us at least 50% of the funding for the mandates that you have created, or give us relief. Relief needs to be specific. Relief needs to define the outer limits of the discretion of the agency. Compliance schedules, keep in mind, we're 40 years after the Clean Water Act. Compliance schedules that are being dictated to us now are no more than 20 years. We're asking that compliance schedules be at least 30, perhaps as long as 50 years. The opportunity to incorporate green infrastructure in substantive ways to offset gray infrastructure and the heavy capital costs associated with that. We've asked for a focus on achieving real water quality improvements rather than a compliance schedule with an arbitrary number of 4 overflow events a year, regardless of the receiving stream. Affordability ultimately needs to be defined as no more than 2% of median household income. 2% should not be the floor, it needs to be the ceiling for costs that are being imposed by all of these water-related mandates. Unfortunately, frankly, we have not seen any substantive action by Congress on our requests. We're still waiting. By the way, I'm a registered Democrat in a nonpartisan office.
Mayor, the grants that you mentioned that we don't have, we did have these grants. We lost them during the Reagan administration. We lost $23 billion with that administration, and those grants, we remember those grants fondly and wish we still had them. Let me ask you this, Mayor. You are very stern in your opinion about where you are, and you know, and I understand that. And of course, we have heard also from our distinguished former president, Mayor Don Pasquale of Akron in Ohio. So, you know, when he's in the room, we hear too. So, but the question I would ask you is: we have this integrated planning policy that's on the table. How do you? I mean, and there are many mayors that are excited about this. What would be your recommendations to the government relative to the fact they are coming forth with this flexible policy?
Well, first of all, we have formally requested to be able to file an integrated plan, and we have our attorneys and engineers actively working on that. So we see it as an opportunity. But it's also become clear, because I participated in at least one of the 5 meetings around the country that you referenced earlier, that there are limits to what the agency believes the integrated plan can accomplish. And I think that, for example, they continue to argue that the preferred vehicle for accomplishing this is a consent decree. They believe and they argue that they're doing us a favor. They're doing us a favor by putting us into consent decrees because it protects us from citizen lawsuits. Mm-hmm. My perspective, and I think the perspective of many, is that the preferred way to regulate this is through permits. If we can't get to that way of regulating, we shouldn't be in the business of taking us into court and treating us like criminals. This becomes a hostile, dictatorial process that is heavy-handed. You know, recently there was a comment publicized by the Region 9 administrator who said very clearly, cities need to be crucified. They need to be made an example of. I know that that gentleman was relieved of his responsibilities, and the agency has spun it that that's the exception. I can tell you that after many conversations with many mayors, it's not the exception. We find ourselves under a heavy cudgel, and the approach of the Department of Justice and US EPA in this is not about stewardship. It's not about the kind of partnership that ought to exist between local governments, the states, and the federal government.
So, I mean, we learned in the brownfields movement back in the 80s that we had states like New Jersey and Illinois that were stepping up to the plate and saying, hey, let's do this. But yet we had Carol Browner at EPA raising questions about that. We worked with her very carefully, and I think we made progress there on the brownfield development. It seems to me when you're a mayor, you're dealing with 3 entities. You're dealing with the regional EPA, you're dealing with the state EPA, and you're dealing with the federal EPA. Is that a fair statement?
It is, and they're not all on the same page.
Right.
I mean, in our instance, for example, the region fired the state. They kept them out of our discussions for most of the time of our negotiations, and we had to insist 6 months ago that the state need to be brought back in.
That's a hell of a note when mayors want the governors to come in and help them.
That's true.
Just want to make that observation. Okay. Okay, we fought a war about that, I think. Okay, let's move on. Thank you so much, Mayor Suttle from Omaha.
Well, good morning,
Nebraska.
everyone. I want to set a little bit of a foundation for my credentials. I am a civil engineer. I'm the former public works director for the city of Omaha back in the 1980s. My entire career, I've had projects all across this great nation as well as some around the globe, and in every one of those, we had environmental issues that had to be solved with engineering before we could move on to the main task at hand. This gives me a very unique perspective as mayor to begin addressing this issue of the CSO, not only from Omaha's standpoint, but in concert with my colleagues with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The unfunded federal mandate is one of the biggest issues that are going to be facing Omaha and all other cities. And it boils down to one single word of concern: affordability. Affordability. It's no secret that cities are under stress and have been for considerable months and years with this recession. What's going on is the states are slashing their budgets. They're pushing the problems down to the cities. The cities now have to figure out how to solve increased burdens and responsibilities, but the cash flow is not there to sustain these. And in the middle of this, we're addressing CSO in some 772 jurisdictions, most of which are cities. Rather than asking cities to bear their